The subcommittee will come to order. The hearing today is to receive testimony on the 2020 budget request for missile defense and to discuss the implementation of the 2019 Missile Defense Review. I appreciate all the witnesses being here. I'll ask unanimous consent that your full testimony can be submitted for the record, so I hope you'll summarize in about 5 minutes. I know that's going to be a challenge because just General Greaves alone was 42 pages, so that's a bigger challenge for him than for the others. But we're honored to have Mr. Beeler here, General O'Shaughnessy, Dr. Anderson, Lieutenant General Greaves, and Vice Admiral Crete. Did I pronounce that correctly? Crete, excuse me. Thank you all for coming today to provide your views. I'd like to single out General Greaves because it's my understanding this is your last hearing, at least on the House side. So I want to express my deep appreciation to you, not only as a general officer in the Air Force, but as a personal friend for your fantastic 37 years of service to the nation. We appreciate the high quality of your work and your extraordinary service. So I'm sorry this will be your last hearing, but you're always welcome to come back and visit us anytime you would like. But thank you, General.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for those very kind words. It's been an honor. Thanks.
Our ranking member.
Came right from
Oh,
votes.
here. Okay, right.
Sorry, I'm not used to the hearing beginning without me. We all just came from votes, so it's not as if we didn't have a direct line.
Perfect timing. Perfect timing.
Great. So you're passing it to me?
Yes. The ranking member, Mr. Turner, for his remarks.
Well, thank you all. I appreciate your expertise and your work. Obviously, with missile defense, we don't have a margin of error. And your work to try to give us the technological edge to be able to protect the American population is incredibly important. We've been through a lot of starts, stops, and shifts into what our mix would be in order to look to protect the continental United States. And I greatly appreciate that you have been part of that overall discussion. I think the Missile Defense Review does start addressing some of our emerging missile threats. The budget request of the Missile Defense Agency is actually lower, though, about $1 billion than fiscal 2019, which is about 10% of MDA's budget. So it startles, I think, all of us of how the administration thinks it can address these increasing missile threats, including hypersonic, at the same time that we have that decrease. Second, in space-based sensing, last year on a bipartisan basis and bicameral basis, in recognition of the threat of hypersonic weapons being developed by Russia, China, Congress increased funding to an MDA program that would have provided a space-based sensing capability. We need that capability to detect and track hypersonic threats coming to the U.S. homeland. This year, that program is zeroed out and does not appear anywhere in the President's budget. Instead, this program appears as MDA's #1 priority on its unfunded priorities list, and I look forward to hearing from General Greaves about his perspectives on the future of this capability. And I also note that the commander of the United States Strategic Command mentioned this program as an area of concern in his letter to the committee on unfunded mandates. Lastly, over the past year, the ground-based mid-course defense system has experienced numerous significant issues that are inadequately addressed in the budget submission. An issue with the redesigned kill vehicle has caused at least a 2-year delay in its fielding. I want to say that again because I keep hearing some of the comments on the response to this as you know, it's going to have minimal impact, or we're dealing with the issue, or we think we found a path forward. It says at least a 2-year delay in fielding. That's because we don't really actually yet even have the answer as to what the solution is going to be. That's what the projections are. And I'm obviously very concerned when I look at missile defense as having no margin of error, that error also should not be significant slips. But this means we will not be able to get all of the ground-based interceptors in place in Fort Greely by 2023. Additionally, the department has significantly decreased funding for the multi-object kill vehicle, reducing funding to keep the program on life support through low-level technology maturation efforts. And the department has once again failed to make a designation on an East Coast missile defense site, which Congress has carried supportive language on the NDAA in its passage since fiscal year 2013. Working with my colleague Elise Stefanik, we've called on the department to publicly announce the location of such a site. The environmental impact statement is complete, and it is imperative that the agency lean forward on the emerging missile capabilities of our adversaries that serve to threaten our homeland and move forward on designating the site to enhance our homeland missile defense capability. Another aspect as to why this is important is you have 3 communities that are vying for this. 2 need to be let go. 2 need to be able to be told that they can stand down and that their communities and their chambers of commerce and everybody else who's working to advocate for their community needs to understand that actually a decision has been made because you've completed all the data work necessary for that decision. It just needs to be announced. Now, on 2 occasions, Acting Secretary of Defense Shanahan has committed on the record to fulfilling Congress's intent on this important matter. On March 26th, in an open hearing of our full committee on the fiscal year 2020 national budget, the Acting Secretary stated to Congresswoman Stefanik that we can count on him sharing the site designation with our committee. Again, then on May 1st, before House Appropriations Defense Subcommittee hearing on DOD's budget request, the Acting Secretary promised Congressman Tim Ryan in an answer on the site selection within hours of the hearing's conclusion. He actually said, I'll get you an answer today. Well, that day has passed. To my knowledge, this promise has not yet been fulfilled either, and so now is the time for the department to make good on its commitments. The GMD program is an essential element of missile defense. It is the only pure homeland defense element of our missile defense architecture, but with multiple delays, failures, and willful disregard of congressional intent, I'm left worrying about the fate of homeland missile defense in the future. There is no doubt that missile threats are increasing quantitatively and qualitatively. More countries have ballistic missiles. All of those missiles are increasing in their integration of countermeasures to evade our current missile defense capability. But this budget submission, the reduction of MDA's budget, and the inability of the enterprise to fulfill basic congressional intent all increase the uncertainty that we can meet these challenges in the future. I look forward to all the witnesses' testimony. Thank you.
I thank the ranking member. Before we hear from the witnesses, let me remind all subcommittee members that there will be a classified hearing after this. That's extremely important to attend, so I hope that your schedules will allow you to be there. As I mentioned earlier, your testimony is submitted for the record, so if you would summarize, starting with Mr. Beeler.
Thank you, Chairman Cooper, Ranking Member Turner, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I'm honored to be here along with the other distinguished panel witnesses here to discuss missile defense testing and my independent assessment of the ballistic missile defense system as a director of operational tests and evaluation. On March 25th of this year, I witnessed the Missile Defense Agency's most operationally realistic flight test of the ground-based mid-course defense system, which is designed to protect the U.S. homeland against an ICBM attack. During that test, a salvo of 2 ground interceptors were employed against an ICBM target that was launched 5,000 miles away. Preliminary indications are that the system worked as designed and intercepted the target. My office was heavily involved in designing this test, reflecting the strong relationship between DOT&E and the Missile Defense Agency. Testing conducted to date demonstrates that the ground-based mid-course defense system is capable of defending the U.S. homeland from small numbers of intermediate-range missiles and ICBM threats with simple countermeasures when BMDS employs its full architecture of sensors and its command and control system. Testing also demonstrates the capability to defend U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, U.S. European Command, and U.S. Central Command from short-range ballistic missiles and from small numbers of medium and intermediate-range ballistic missiles. Missile defense system flight testing is constrained by many factors, most notably range safety considerations and cost. Independently accredited modeling and simulation instantiated by flight test data is necessary to adequately assess the effectiveness of the missile defense system in complex, realistic scenarios. The following key challenges affect effectiveness. It affects the missile defense capabilities and my ability to assess its capabilities. First, the need for accredited modeling and simulation to adequately assess the BMDS effectiveness. Susceptibility of BMDS to cyber attacks. Third, reliability and sustainment. Fourth, interoperability and automated engagement deconfliction. And fifth, discrimination of threat reentry vehicles. In closing, I'd like to echo the Chairman's comments. General Greaves transitioning out of the Air Force after a very distinguished military career. I pause to commend General Greaves for his steadfast leadership of the Missile Defense Agency and how professionally he's coordinated with me and my staff during his tenure. I thank the subcommittee for your attention and look forward to your questions.
Thank you. General O'Shaughnessy.
Thank you, Chairman Cooper and Ranking Member Turner and our distinguished members of the subcommittee. I'm truly honored to appear today as the Commander of the United States Northern Command and North American Aerospace Defense Command. And while I'm honored to be here with all of my colleagues, I too want to recognize Lieutenant General Sam Greaves and all the members of MDA for their incredible support to the warfighter, both now and looking into the future. I know we are in good hands with a great partner. And I'll keep my remarks brief to allow more time for your questions, but I do want to start by thanking you for the opportunity to testify today. As a warfighter responsible for defending the homeland from attack, I'm truly grateful for the steadfast support of this subcommittee. That support is vital, as revisionist powers of Russia and China have given every indication that their own security strategies are based on holding the United States at risk with both conventional and nuclear weapons. And they have signaled that we must anticipate attacks against our civilian and defense infrastructure in the event of a conflict. And as a result, it is clear to me that the homeland is not a sanctuary. U.S. NORTHCOM and NORAD's mission to deter our adversaries is clearly dependent on our ability to detect and defeat potential threats to the homeland. And to outpace our adversaries, we must take prudent steps now to ensure our next-generation defensive capabilities, to include a space-based sensing layer, are not late to need. We must also act now to improve our ability to see and defeat the advanced long-range cruise missiles already fielded by our adversaries. And I'm grateful to the subcommittee for your strong support of U.S. NORTHCOM and NORAD priorities along these lines of effort. And no matter the threat, the men and women of U.S. NORTHCOM and NORAD are deeply committed to defending our nations, and I'm honored to represent them today. Gentlemen, we have the watch, and thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Dr. Anderson.
Chairman Cooper, Ranking Member Turner, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on the Department's Missile Defense Policy, Posture, and Budget. The MDR articulates a comprehensive approach to address the missile threat through strengthened deterrence and active missile defense systems for both homeland and regional defense. Over the past decade, North Korea and Iran have accelerated efforts to develop and field missiles capable of threatening U.S. strategic interests. North Korea possesses a range of systems, including road-mobile intercontinental ballistic missiles, solid propellant medium-range ballistic missiles, and submarine-launched ballistic missiles. For its part, Iran already possesses the largest stockpile of regional missile systems in the Middle East. Iran continues to improve its missile capabilities and develop space launch vehicles which provide knowledge to develop an intercontinental range ballistic missile if they decide to pursue that path. We also see the reemergence of long-term strategic competition by revisionist powers in Russia and China. Russia and China are expanding and modernizing a wide range of offensive missile capabilities. As highlighted in the MDR, a comprehensive layered defense is needed to address today's complex threats. Within the MDR framework, the key roles for missile defense include protecting the United States homeland, our forces abroad, and allies and partners, diminishing the benefits of adversary coercive threats and attacks, assuring allies and partners that we will stand by our security commitments, preserving our freedom of action to conduct military operations, and hedging against future unanticipated missile threats. Let me now turn to missile defense capabilities, posture, and budget that flow from our policy in the MDR to counter these threats. Regarding the first priority, to protect the United States homeland, today, the United States is protected by the ground-based mid-course defense GMD system. The budget requests $1.8 billion for the system, which includes a number of improvements, such as adding 20 ground-based interceptors in Alaska, bringing the total to 64, continuing development of the redesigned kill vehicle for improved reliability, and continuing to build a new missile field at Fort Greely, Alaska. The budget also requests funding to field new discrimination radars in Alaska and Hawaii and extend operations for a sea-based X-band radar. To address the regional missile threat, our efforts focus on an integrated air and missile defense to defend U.S. forces abroad, allies, and partners against missile threats from any source. We are strengthening our regional missile defense posture by funding several programs. For instance, we are enhancing the Aegis ballistic missile defense system by procuring the Standard Missile 3, Block 1B, and Block 2A missile and integrated SPY-6 radar. The Department will also procure additional terminal high-altitude area defense THAAD interceptors, Patriot interceptors, and Army indirect fire protection capability command and control system. In addition to improving our legacy system, the 2019 MDR calls for pursuing a range of technologies and examining advanced concepts and breakthrough technologies. We are requesting funding for additional sensors, integrated space-based kill assessment into the ballistic missile defense system, operating and sustaining the space tracking and surveillance system, developing defenses against hypersonic missiles, testing the SM-3 Block 2A capability against an ICBM-class target, kinetic boost phase intercept using a tactical air platform, technology maturation initiatives, including initiating a neutral particle beam technology demonstration program, and a study of space-based interceptors. The MDR stresses the importance of working with allies and partners and encouraging them to invest in their own air and missile defense capabilities that are interoperable with U.S. capabilities. Interoperable integrated air and missile defense systems can take advantage of cost sharing and help distribute the burden of the common defense. In closing, our missile defense investments and priorities focus on concepts and advanced technologies to ensure the continuing effectiveness of our missile defenses against capabilities of potential adversaries. By so doing, we will strengthen our ability to protect the homeland, enhance deterrence, stabilize crises, and better control escalation, protect and assure allies and partners, and hedge against future threats. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. General Greaves.
Chairman Cooper, Ranking Member Turner, distinguished members of the subcommittee, good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity to testify on the Missile Defense Agency's budget request for fiscal year 2020. I first wish to thank the subcommittee for its continued support of this very important mission area. I'd also like to thank the thousands of men and women across government and industry who tirelessly work every single day in support of our nation's ballistic missile defense system. Without question, they are the source of our strength and one of the reasons the armed forces of the United States remain unparalleled in the world. Our budget request of $9.4 billion supports the President's commitment to sustain, expand, and improve the performance and reliability of the nation's missile defense systems and reflects what was broadly articulated in the 2019 Missile Defense Review. This funding request will continue development, rigorous testing, and fielding of reliable, increasingly capable, and advanced defenses for the protection of the United States, our deployed forces, allies, and partners against current and projected missile threats. The agency is also taking significant steps in improving the cybersecurity posture of the ballistic missile defense operational and developmental systems in defending against emerging cyber threats. We will continue to work closely with the Director of Operational Test and Evaluation and the combatant commanders in such things as persistent cyber operations testing to enhance our cyber defense posture. On GMD, program plans for the ground-based mid-course defense system included the continued construction of 22 missile silos at Fort Greely, Alaska, and the procurement of an additional 20 ground-based interceptors for Homeland Defense upon completion of the redesigned kill vehicle development program. However, during the redesigned kill vehicle program's design phase, I assessed that we were unable to meet a key set of critical entrance criteria for our critical design review, the result of which is a projected delay in the program of up to 2 years. On sensors, with the addition of the long-range discriminating radar, the Homeland Defense radar in Hawaii, and in the future, the Pacific radar, we will have in place a diverse sensor architecture in the Pacific to provide an improved and persistent mid-course tracking and discrimination capability against future threats. The combination of high speed, maneuverability, and relatively low altitude of some of the emerging advanced offensive capabilities makes them challenging threats for our missile defense systems. A space sensor layer is needed because we cannot populate the Earth and the oceans with enough terrestrial radars to meet this need to track these threats. The birth-to-death tracking that space sensors can provide when integrated with terrestrial sensors will make it possible to maintain custody of missile threats from launch through intercept, regardless of launch location. On regional defenses, For regional defense, we are increasing the number of terminal high-altitude area defense interceptors and Standard Missile 3 Block 1Bs and Block 2As, investing in their modernization and upgrade to enhance our Aegis ballistic missile defense capabilities. Additionally, through incremental upgrades to our command and control, battle management, and communication system, we will continue to integrate homeland and regional missile defense capabilities, improving the global missile defense battle management tools of the combatant commanders. Finally, projected missile threats include new ballistic missile systems, advanced cruise missiles, and hypersonic missile capabilities that are now being actively tested by other nations. We continue to advance the state-of-the-art for scaling electric laser power and pursue competing technologies to reduce their development risk. Such efforts as distributed gain, diode-pumped alkali lasers, and fiber-combined laser technology have the potential to meet missile defense requirements. With this budget, we will also fund software modifications to the ballistic missile defense system and further define the architecture for future hypersonic defense demonstrations. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Turner, and members of the subcommittee, in closing, our FY20 budget funds missile defense development efforts, including several critical capabilities required by the warfighter. We will continue to increase the liability as well as the capability and capacity of fielded homeland and regional missile defense systems and make measured investments in advanced technology to counter the adversary missile threat. Thank you once again, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General. Vice Admiral Creedy.
Chairman Cooper, Ranking Member Turner, and distinguished committee members, good afternoon. I am honored to appear before you today on behalf of General John Hyten, the Commander of U.S. Strategic Command, and the 162,000 Americans who are accomplishing our missions every day. As the warfighter advocate for missile defense, it's my privilege to sit alongside our missile defense partners, General O'Shaughnessy, Mr. Baylor, Mr. Anderson, and Lieutenant General Greaves, because we cannot do our missions alone. The defense of our nation against missile threats is certainly a team effort, requiring each of us sitting before you today to work together in defense of the homeland, our allies, and our partners. I want to begin by thanking this committee for your enduring support to national defense. The stability afforded through this year's on-time budget came at a critical time for us, and I cannot overstate the enormous impact it has had on improving our force readiness and modernization efforts. I would also like to express my gratitude to this subcommittee for broadening the strategic deterrence discussion and bringing this issue back to the forefront of our national dialogue. Today we are here to discuss missile defense. Although this is one single mission from the broad portfolio assigned to U.S. STRATCOM, missile defense remains a central tenet of our overall strategic deterrence mission. As stated in the National Security Strategy, the United States has a robust and credible layered missile defense system, which when paired with offensive capabilities, this combination sends a strong message allowing us to deny benefits and impose costs against any potential adversary. Although we rely on nuclear capabilities to deter near-peer strategic threats, missile defense endures as a critical component of comprehensive strategic and tailored regional deterrence strategies. Today, the United States, our allies, and partners face potential adversaries who are investing in additional capacity and new technologies specifically designed to defeat current missile defense systems. If left unaddressed, this expanding missile threat could embolden our adversaries into mistakenly believing that they can coerce us, inhibit our freedom of action, or undermine our security alliances. So out of necessity and prudence, we must adapt to the new threats as well. We must adapt faster than our adversaries to ensure we never fail in our highest priority. Above all else, we will provide strategic deterrence. In order to stay ahead of these threats, we must field adaptable systems capable of meeting the changing security environment. Our missile defense approach must integrate active missile defenses to intercept adversary missiles, passive defenses to mitigate their effects, and options during a conflict to neutralize missile threats prior to launch. There will not be a silver bullet or a single exquisite capability that will provide a perfect solution. So we must be vigilant in our efforts to outpace emerging threats and not cede our current advantage. We must also do so in a cost-effective manner. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to your questions.
I thank the witnesses for their testimony. I would like to ask unanimous consent that non-subcommittee members also be able to ask questions at the end of the questioning. And I would like to hold all members, myself included, to the 5-minute rule so that we can get to the classified session in a more rapid manner. Hearing no objection, then non-subcommittee members will be able to ask questions as well. If I had to summarize all the testimony, I would say that the single most important line, at least the most surprising line to the average citizen, would be from General O'Shaughnessy when he said on page 10 that he views the Arctic as the front line of defense for North America, for U.S. and Canada. I think most Americans would be surprised by that. Can you elaborate?
Chairman, thanks for highlighting that. And we do view as the threat that we see today, both of the cruise missile threat, the bomber threat, and ultimately, potentially the hypersonic threat as it continues to be developed, that we have a capability gap developing if we don't take action now. We see that as an avenue of approach that clearly, if you were, for example, putting yourself in the Russian position, that if you were going to attack North America, that would be the avenue that you would likely choose. As such, we are advocating for increased domain awareness, increased ability to operate in that environment, and ultimately to make sure that we stay ahead of the threats that we feel are coming from that direction.
The ranking member quite properly mentioned the missing funding for space-based sensors. Can anybody explain where that funding will come from?
So I'd be happy to start on that. It is true in the MDA budget there's not requested funding, although it does appear on the unfunded list. Space sensor efforts related do appear, however, in the Space Development Agency's budget. As you know, the Space Development Agency is just getting started. It's hired a director, has a small staff, but there are certain lines in that requested budget related to space sensor efforts. And those, for example, there's proliferated low Earth orbit sensor technology, $20 million for that. There's what's known as the data transport layer architecture and standards. There's $15 million for that. There's a ground integration for PLEO as well, another $30 million, as well as a space-based discrimination study, $15 million. So there is money, but it is in a different place this year. And the big reason for that is over the past year, there's been kind of a change in the department's approach in terms of thinking about where to put future satellites. And the essential shift, and perhaps General Greaves could elaborate, is moving from a kind of a mid-level orbit to the low Earth orbit and having a more distributed architecture, leveraging work that both the Air Force has done and DARPA has done in a distributed approach. So that is where we're headed going forward.
Thank you. Mr. Beeler mentioned that we face a deficit in cross-training or joint training for our THAAD and Patriot crews so that we can operate in a truly layered defense, because there won't be very good layers if they're not communicating with each other.
Excuse me, sir. Yeah, that's exactly right. I said that in my written testimony, and we've found that when we want to look at deconfliction using THAAD and Patriot, the training's not there, and we have no automated way of doing deconfliction. So training is really important, I think, for the soldiers operating these systems.
Thank you. And Mr. Beeler, can you explain why the recent and thankfully successful test cost $300 million?
Well, I can attempt to, sir. There's a lot of assets being used there. We launched, Missile Defense launched 3 ICBMs that cross 5 different ranges. Range safety is a big cost associated with that, making sure it's all clear, all the assets required to keep it clear. And the missiles themselves, the interceptors, the ground-based interceptors, they cost upwards to $80 to $90 million a piece also. We launched 2 of those. So if you add all that up, I think the biggest cost is range safety.
Mm-hmm. Finally, Admiral Creedy, General Hyten, in his testimony, which you delivered very well, urges us to take more risk to be more entrepreneurial. Can you explain that statement?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Cooper. General Hyten has remarked on many occasions about the urgent need for us as a department to be able to go faster, to set requirements, to develop capabilities, put them in the field of our warfighters faster than we've been doing in recent years. And it's really all based on the threat. And as we see, particularly in this missile defense area, the range of missile capabilities that are being developed by a number of our adversaries, both an increased capability and capacity in ways that are used to either coerce or provide aggressive means to our adversaries. They're doing that at a pace that makes it more and more challenging for us to stay ahead of it. Make no mistake, as the combatant commander responsible for coordinating missile defense, General Hyten firmly believes that we are ahead of the threat today. But they are closing the gap quickly, and that's why we need to go fast.
Thank you. My time has expired. The ranking member.
Thank you. To each of you, as you recall, 10 years ago, missile defense was viewed as provocative, that it costs too much and that it wasn't going to work. Through your work and the accomplishments of Israel and the actual application that they have had to deploy, the conversation has changed. No longer do people look at it as provocative. They actually know that it doesn't cost too much. It saves lives. It actually reduces the risk. It de-escalates. And in fact, it works. But in some instances, we still have a tremendous amount of work to do. I want to thank you for the work that you are doing. General Greaves, you were in my office, though, and we were talking about the issue of structure, of how do we make all these things work. And there's a lot of talk about Space Force, Space Corps, Space Command, and one of the concerns that you were discussing was how all these fit together. And you gave an excellent description of how the Space Development Agency might assist and that would not compete with the Missile Defense Agency. I thought you might share that for us here.
Thank you, Congressman Turner. Getting right to the answer to the question is the way I would look at this entire mission area is what is the mission? The mission is missile defense. The mission is hypersonic defense. The mission is defense against dim targets and other challenging targets. So the answer to that is not a specific element, such as a satellite or a radar or a ship. The answer is an integrated architecture that is layered as in resilient, that can respond to the threat and meet the threat. So the current ballistic missile defense system is composed, as you know, of ground radars. It's composed of such elements as the space-based infrared system that the Air Force flies. It's composed of the Navy ships. It's composed of the THAAD system. And those are all elements, but they're only important because they feed into an integrated command and control ballistic missile defense architecture that then picks out specific interceptors to go execute the mission. So why do I not feel that the Space Development Agency is competing with missile defense? Because the mission of missile defense resides within the Missile Defense Agency. The ability to take disparate sensors and capabilities from wherever they may occur, whether they're organic or non-traditional missile defense sensors, and integrate them, that's what's important, into the architecture is what makes it very powerful. And that's how I would answer the question, sir.
General, as you know, the East Coast Missile Defense Site, as it's called, even though two of the sites that are being considered are in the Midwest, not the East Coast, was congressionally mandated for the beginning of the assessment process. The Missile Defense Review states that no work will be done on this site until there is actually a maturation of the threat. I don't think anybody is arguing with that. We are, though, very concerned about the designation of the site. It was congressionally mandated. The work is done. If you tell the sites, then obviously, as I indicated, 2 communities would be released. It wouldn't require that you move forward. Is there anything that happened? Is there any prejudice to you because when you and I were having this conversation, it didn't seem like there was any. Is there any prejudice to you to complete that designation as long as it's clear that we're not proceeding until the threat is mature?
Congressman, I will say, first of all, that I am not the decision maker. However, since you've asked the question, I have made the recommendation to proceed with that, and it's being debated and deliberated within the department up through the SecDef's level and other places. And my hope is that we come to a conclusion and make a decision.
I appreciate both your recommendation in favor, but also your answer, and I want to give my last minute to Elise Stefanik.
Just to follow up on this, I appreciate my colleague and friend Mr. Turner's focus on this. Our congressional intent was very clear. The environmental impact study was funded, was authorized by Congress. That has been completed. We had language in previous NDAAs that would require an announcement of the preferred site. And to your point, General Greaves, about the decision-making process, the Secretary of Defense sat in this very committee room and said on record under oath that he intended and had no problem and would meet our request to voluntarily provide that information to Congress. Not only did he say that to me in answering my questions, but he also said that to Tim Ryan. So our expectation on the record, let me make it perfectly clear, is that our expectation that we will hear from the Secretary of Defense what the preferred site is. Just to reiterate Mr. Turner's point, you have 3 communities who have worked incredibly hard to advocate on behalf of this. One of mine is Fort Drum, which I believe is the strongest community to be the preferred site. But we expect to hear that from the Department of Defense, and I look forward to hearing feedback today from the department in response to this to my question or my comment. I yield back.
Mr. Carbajal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses that are here today. General Greaves, how many ground missile defense tests have been conducted to date, and how many and what percentage of these tests have been successful?
Congressman, I should know the number. I do not at hand. But what the main message I'd leave you with is that I absolutely believe it is wrong to compare testing and test results done at the beginning of any developmental program with testing that's done as a product of learning from those failures and successes, but are done more recently. I see it disturbs me quite a bit. I see straight math done on 10 launches and 3 failures, so you've got a 30% failure rate, math in public. I would ask you to look at the testing record of the ballistic missile defense system since 2010. There were 2 failures back then, but what was done to recover from those failures, to improve the system, and test against ever more challenging targets, threats, and the successes that we've had. The devil is in the details. And that's where I think we need to go, as opposed to looking at the straight math, comparing testing done in 2005 to testing done in 2019. They're not similar at all.
Well, let me ask you a different way. You can't have it both ways. You can't have it, we can't look at it that way and then look at it that way. Recently, a statement was made that our missile defense system would be 97% effective against North Korea missiles. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, it is, and I can discuss that further in a classified session.
Okay. When planning and developing these test scenarios, how do you ensure these tests are not using outdated threat representations?
In this form, I can say that all test scenarios begin with input from the intelligence community to assess what that threat is. And then we work very closely with the developmental testers and the operational testers to design the test, the objectives of the test. It's approved by, in an operational test, as an example, approved by the operational testers to say these are the goals, these are the parameters, this is pass, fail, and then we go off and execute it. So it's as realistic as we can get it.
Thank you. Just going back, on one hand, you're telling me that it is 97% effective. But on the other hand, you didn't give me any specifics about the percentage of tests, the success rate we've had. Is it 97%?
It is 97% capable against the threat that we foresee. The testing, as I might say, we had failures early on, but the record since 2013, I believe, has been if not 100% successful, very successful. So on the record, so I can get you those numbers.
Thank you. General O'Shaughnessy, if North Korea launched a missile or multiple missiles at the homeland today, would you be confident that the current GMD system would be successful in intercepting these attacks?
Sir, I'm highly confident that we would be able to intercept said attack from North Korea.
Thank you. One major concern I have in regards to the GMD program is the lack of reporting and the availability of unclassified information on the GMD testing and development. There has been less transparency specifically on the testing front. This is a problem because it inhibits us from effectively conducting the oversight that is our responsibility. It is my understanding that DOT&E used to provide unclassified reports on the GMD program, but this has not happened in recent years. Mr. Beller and General Greaves, can you both commit to resuming these practices in the future?
I think there's a issue of operational security that I'm concerned with. I'd be happy to, in the right venue, to talk about the classified details, the reliability rates. I have them with me now. We can talk about them when we go close. But to publish an open document that talks about that kind of information, I feel as my responsibility to the American people, I'm very uncomfortable putting that data out that's right now classified.
But you would put that in a classified setting for us.
Right, and as a matter of fact, I also publish a classified annual report on missile defense, and that information is also in the document that I send you every year.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Mr. Byrne?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Greaves, once again, thank you for your service to our country. I think you would agree that a key piece to the future sensor architecture, specifically for hypersonic defense, is deployment of a space sensor. But I didn't see, and perhaps I just didn't read it right, in the President's budget submission for 2020 that MDA was requesting any funds for that effort. Did I miss something, or is there somebody else that's going to do that, or can you enlighten me on that?
Congressman, it was not missed. The decision was made to put that money, that funding, into the Space Development Agency's budget. I think it was $20 million to initiate that study.
So the Space Development Agency will do it?
To initiate that study. I will add that the Congress funded the Missile Defense Agency in FY19 to continue work on the payload and the sensor capability. And what the Space Development Agency is initially working on is the spacecraft bus, the host for the sensor itself, as well as the overall architecture and the transport layer. That's not what we're doing. We are focused on the sensor capability to detect the target and pass on the needed information.
Okay, well, thank you for that clarification. That's good. Just sort of getting at it a little bit more generally, what are your greatest challenges of defending against hypersonic missiles at this point in time?
Thank you, sir. Very good question. In my mind, it's their speed, it's their maneuverability, and the altitudes at which they fly, which are relatively low when compared to ballistic missile defense systems. So unlike the predictability of a ballistic threat, which essentially comes from the point it's originating to where it's going, we have to ensure that we maintain custody from the time it's launched to the time we intercept it. And with the speed, maneuverability, and lower altitude, that becomes more challenging.
So what solutions have you identified, and how much will those solutions cost?
We've identified that there are two distinct phases of mitigating that threat. The less preferable case for us is in the terminal phase, the last phase. The area where it's most susceptible is in the glide phase, and then that's where we're focusing our attention, and we can talk more about that in the classified section.
Can you speak to the cost in a non-classified setting?
I prefer to wait until we
Okay,
get there.
I understand. Thank you. Well, I just want to register my concern about where we are versus some of our adversaries on hypersonics. I know that you're well aware of that. You know far more about it than I do, but the more I learn about it, the more I'm concerned about it, and I hope during the classified briefing you can give us a little more detail about it.
Yes, sir, and I'll leave you with this thought that the hypersonic defense mission, the hypersonic concern, the hypersonic mission is at either at the top or very near one or two in Dr. Griffin's priority list of areas we need to address, and it flows down from there.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Garamendi?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think most of my questions are going to wind up in the classified, so I'll let them go. But I do have one that would be probably in the unclassified. Iron Dome. Recently, 2 systems to be acquired by the Army. It seems to have been successful. There's 1,700 successful intercepts by the Iron Dome, about 90% success rate. The cost of it seems to be significantly less than our systems, something around $40,000 a shot. I think the Patriot's about $6 million a shot. Mr. Beeler, I see you nodding your head, so that must be about right. You don't, I'll just assume that it's right, given the nod of your head.
Well, I would not go to the bank on that number, but I think it's in that range, yes, sir.
I count by 10. The question here is, how does this fit into our missile defense systems? And I guess Mr. General Greaves and General O'Shaughnessy with regard to the NORTHCOM, General Greaves with regard to the overall.
Yeah, Congressman Garamendi, I'll first start by saying that the threat against which the Iron Dome is deployed is a very different threat, projectiles essentially, in close-range missiles than what Patriot or THAAD or the ground-based mid-course defense. When I talk about the successful GBI test that we just did, we're talking closing speeds of 22,000 miles an hour.
Understood.
At various altitudes. So the complexity of the threat has a significant factor, is a significant factor in the ultimate cost of the intercept system.
You used the word layered defense. It's been used by several of you here. And for Mr. General O'Shaughnessy, specifically, is Iron Dome part of a layered defense for your mission? And then more generally, I guess this would be for Mr. Beller or Dr. Anderson, for the general military purposes.
Sure, we absolutely do support the layered defense mentality. That is, I think, as we look into the future against all threats, against ballistic missiles, against cruise missiles, and against the future hypersonic missiles, the end state needs to be a layered defense capability and capacity throughout North America. As we look at the particulars of the Iron Dome specifically, to Lieutenant General Greaves' point, it is it's a different nature of the threat there. What I do absolutely agree with is we have to flip the cost curve. Right now, if you look at the cost per shot that we are taking against anywhere from ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and eventually hypersonics, we are on the wrong end of that cost curve. So to your point, I absolutely support and agree that we do need to flip that cost curve so we can have a high rate of fire, a large magazine at a much lower cost if we're going to be able to truly defend North America.
Presumably, the Iron Dome is good for cruise missiles?
So again, it depends on the specifics of the type of missiles that we're talking about. For example, we have some capability capacity within the National Capital Region that is similar in nature, but it is of a different nature of the threat that we would necessarily want to apply across all of North America.
Okay. In a larger context, with regard to the U.S. Army acquiring 2 batteries, I guess Mr. Beller or Dr. Anderson, the utility of it there?
So my understanding is the Army is acquiring this as kind of an interim solution. It may end up being a permanent solution for them to be used in deployed contexts, whether that be in the European theater or perhaps in the Indo-Pacific theater. It's, as your question suggested, it is a proven system, highly effective, and it's something that the Army has decided to at least start with as part of their ability to defend themselves. And this is important because, as indicated in the Missile Defense Review, which does obviously talk about homeland defense, but it also talks about supporting our friends and allies and being able to preserve our freedom of movement abroad of U.S. forces. And in the particular context of European theater and also the Indo-Pacific theater, we face some pretty tall military challenges, and having an ability to protect ourselves from shorter range projectiles is very important, and that's part of this equation.
Mr. Beller, I'll take it offline since we're out of time, and we've been held to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Ms. Cheney?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses. General O'Shaughnessy, could you talk about whether or not you agree with some of the assessments we've seen, particularly from General Hyten, based on reports that China is got the capability now, and they've had numerous successful tests of hypersonic missiles. General Hyten has talked about our inability currently to have any defense that would deny an adversary the capability of employing such weapons against our country. Would you agree with that assessment?
Ma'am, I do agree with General Hyten's assessment.
And given that, would you agree that our strategic triad is currently the only form of defense that we have of deterrence against hypersonic threats from our adversaries?
Obviously, the triad is incredibly important in respect to a threat that is advancing, making it very challenging to defense against. The triad gives us the ability of that assured use.
And is it your best military advice that the current triad is both adequate and necessary to defend against the threat of hypersonic?
Yes, ma'am. I'm a strong advocate for the triad and keeping the triad as we see it today.
Thank you very much. Let me ask General Greaves if you could talk a little bit about specifically why the space-based sensors are so important in terms of missile defense against hypersonics in particular.
Yes, ma'am. I'll start by saying that the nature of a ballistic threat is that if I'm sitting here and I throw a baseball in your direction, it goes in a straight line. And it goes in a parabolic shape unless I throw a fastball directly at you. The hypersonic threat operates at much lower altitude. It starts off at a higher altitude and uses that energy it gains to bleed it off to accomplish maneuver, as well as fly at or right above the atmosphere. So unlike a ballistic threat where you can accept some gaps in your sensing capability because you know if it starts here and it's aimed in your direction, it will end up in your direction, the ability to maneuver, which is dependent again on the boost vehicle that the hypersonic threat is using and the energy that it's given, allows it to maneuver out of that space. And custody is absolutely critical because we need to ensure we know where it's going, what it's doing, and the type of mitigating defensive capability we need to deploy against it, whether it be kinetic, or in the future, potentially directed energy, or some other capability. So that is the major difference, and that's what causes the concern. The ability to sense the hypersonic threat because it's flying lower at or above the atmosphere, sometimes in the atmosphere, depending on where it's going, proposes specific challenges to overhead sensors, and I've got, we can talk more about that in the classified session, but we need an architecture which will maintain custody from birth to death of that very dynamic and challenging target, and that in essence is what it is.
Thank you, and let me add my concern to the concern you've heard from, I think, just about everybody on the subcommittee on both sides, that this was zeroed out in the budget, and our commitment to making sure that we do everything we can to provide the resources necessary in that regard. This is also for General Greaves. The 2019 Missile Defense Review talked about the need to consider all operational options, including offensive strikes, as part of our strategy for ballistic missile defense. I'm wondering if you can address who's responsible across the department and the combatant commanders with respect to policy and capability development to integrate these offensive strike capabilities to deny adversaries the ability to launch ballistic missiles against the United States.
Yes, ma'am. I'll begin with the policy end of it, and that's in Dr. Anderson's office, led by Secretary Rood. And the remaining portions of that task is an integrated approach across the department, beginning with the intelligence community supplying the requirements, with the combatant commander in the case of missile defense, the strategic command after coordinating across all the combatant commanders, and to include General O'Shaughnessy. And then within the acquisition portion of it, it could be led or would be led by agencies such as the Missile Defense Agency working with the services. It's never one one thing, for instance, that the Missile Defense Agency does by itself. It's always in concert with the services. And supporting all of that is a rigorous and robust process that ensures interaction between, in my case, the Missile Defense Agency and each of the services, as well as each of the COCOMs led by Vice Admiral Creedy and his team up at STRATCOM. So it's an integrated approach, and I think that that is a very beneficial approach because it ensures that we receive various perspectives on what may or may not be the best approach, and then a decision maker, if it's an acquisition and if it's in my lane with my milestone decision authority, it's me. If it's initial production and on, it's Ms. Lord. If it's research and engineering, it's Dr. Griffin. So we all know who the responsible entity is within the department.
Thank you. I'll have some additional questions in the closed hearing, but I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Greaves, a Dod Ig report was issued in January of this year on Dod Cybersecurity, and it stated that while some actions had been taken by DoD to improve its cybersecurity posture, you still had some challenges managing cybersecurity risks in your networks, and as I understand it, it was at contractor locations where they found the most exposure. What are your thoughts about that IG report?
I thank the IG for the time they spent assessing our capabilities. During that process, I'll be frank, I learned quite a bit between auditors and capability assessments. You know, an audit is very different from a capability assessment. When an audit is done, unless all the boxes are checked, if there's one that's unchecked, then there's an assumption that there's a problem throughout the system. What's important for the ballistic missile defense system, and in this case it was the developmental architecture that we got, not the operational architecture. That is not the issue or the concern here. We have a layered defense system which is actively monitored, not only within the agency, but across the department up to the CIO within the department. And for everything such as authentication of people who try to access the weapon system or the development part of the weapon system, those are strictly controlled. So we had a very robust, I personally went down to see the IG staff. With my staff, we talked with them at length regarding their findings, and we're at the point now where they have responded to us that the issues that they identified are on their way to being resolved if we can sign off on a few things. So it is a real threat. We have a layered defense system against that threat. It is not the operational system. It's the developmental system that they were concerned about. And I think the IG learned quite a bit about defense in depth as opposed to an audit.
Great. That's all I've got. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the subcommittee members for their questions. I can tease the classified session by saying there'll be an excellent home movie shown, so no one will want to miss that. So why don't we start that session at 3:20 upstairs in 2212. This public portion of the hearing is adjourned. Yeah.